Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
The subject today is kinship, caregivers, and caretakers. Do you like the subject?
Yes.
Caregivers and caretakers. And I have three guests today, and I'll be introducing them in just a bit, but I just want to say that in our society we have lots of challenges. I believe we are very aware of veterans who are, many of them are struggling. We have homelessness. We have an issue with opioids, drugs. And there comes a point when, for whatever reason, children are not able to be taken care of by the parents, that they have to go through a process. And I believe that process and that concept we encapsulated under the word kinship. I really want you to correct me as we move on, but there's a concept called kinship, and it has to do with again, children who for various reasons are not able to stay with the parents, and they have to find a home. So I just want to kind of set the stage, and now I'm going to introduce our guests, because the three guests that we have today are very much involved with this matter of kinship care. When you deal with kinship, you deal with the caregiver, but then there's also the caretaker. In other words, who are those folks who end up taking care of the children, and then who are these caretakers? Who are these children? Why do they eventually end up without a home? And there are various reasons, and we're gonna go over all those items. But let me introduce my guest, and I'm just gonna go from my left, and not that in any order, but just. Oralia Gracia Alinea is a former kinship caregiver. There's something there that we would like to know. Former, so there must be an experience there, and she is also with Casey Family Programs. Oralia, thank you very much. If you can kind of speak to the mic, for making time and joining us today. Welcome. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Then if we continue to my left, we have Victoria Gray. Victoria Gray is a kinship caregiver. That means you're still doing it.
Yes.
Okay. And you are the representative of the grandparent ambassadors. So if you can get close to the mic. Welcome,
yes.
Victoria. Thank you for making time to join us.
Thank you, David, for having us. This is such a great topic for us to talk about. But yes, I am a caregiver since '93. And we still have 4 in the home, so we have a little ways to go still.
Thank you very much. And then if we continue, we have Jenny Cook. And Jenny Cook is the co-founder of Boost a Foster Family. This is a new nonprofit. So Jenny, thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, you are the experts. You are the ones who know. So I'm going to ask you for your help in addressing this matter. So feel free to say, hey, David, wait a minute. We haven't addressed this issue. Let's do it. It's a conversation. So I'll just try to gear the conversation and then watch for the time. But other than that, I really want you to picture thousands of people listening to you, and you want to communicate something to them. Deal?
Yes.
So make sure that whatever's in you, get it out, okay? Because you're the experts. So let me start. Take about 3 minutes, Victoria. Tell us, how is it that you are involved with this kinship care, And in sharing, kind of, tell us a little bit about your experience. You have about 3 minutes, and then we'll continue on the second segment with the two of you. Go ahead, Victoria.
Okay, so I got involved in kinship care back in '92 when we were told that our granddaughter, who we didn't know existed, was in foster care. And it took us until February of '93 to get her out of the foster care system. But she was medical fragile. 6 months later, her brother came. So we had these two babies with us, and it kind of upset us to the point where I was working. I had to quit work because of the medical needs of the children. So it became a financial hardship in the beginning of trying to figure out how to continue to meet the bills as well as meet the real medical needs of these children. So it was a struggle, and we decided the second child was not biologically linked to us, so we were no longer kinship. And we had to become foster parents in order to keep the brother and sister together. That led us into foster care, where we fostered 41 children until 2007, when my daughter gets in trouble and we take in her 5. At the time was a 9-year-old, a set of twins, boy and a girl, 5, and a set of twins, boy and a girl, 3.
That is unbelievable.
That is what my life is about, and the twins are still in the home.
So what is the time span, the number of years that you basically have been involved in kinship care?
My first grandchild came in February of '92.
92, wow.
And
now,
so,
when those children came to you, were you informed, or was that something like, what do I do now?
No, it was a phone call.
It was
and
a phone call.
That's what happens with a
okay.
lot of kinship families. It's
see.
a phone call that there's a relative, whether it be your grandchild or even a sibling's, your niece or nephew's child, that needs a home. And so you get that phone call, and one of the things that kinship families are really good at is we don't say no. How do you say no to turning your family away?
Of course.
And so the state takes advantage of that situation, and the grandparents, aunts and uncles are usually taking in the children.
So basically the state had done its homework, so to speak, and they knew about you, and then that's how they contacted you?
Well, my son told them
I
to
see.
contact my mom.
Got it. Okay, we have to go on our first break, and seems a little short because I have to set out the Facebook Live, so we start a little late. Stay with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. We'll take a little break, and we'll be back to continue with this important subject, kinship, caregivers, and caretakers. We'll be right back.
Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection, with the subject today, kinship, caregivers, and caretakers. Let us now go to Jenny Cook. Again, she's the founder of Boost, a foster family. So how, Jenny, did you get involved with, kinship, and then what are you currently doing? Go ahead.
Well, my first experience with kinship care was when my nephew moved in with us during his high school years. It was an informal placement. And after that, I started working as a licensing worker, and I met a wonderful family that was being licensed just for community care. And a few years after I resigned at that position, they contacted me and said they wanted to start a nonprofit, and would I be interested in helping them get it off the ground. So 3 years ago, we started Boost to Foster Family. And what motivated Michelle Noe, the co-founder, was during the classes that she was required to take, she met kinship families that were struggling with finances and with hardships that they were facing during their licensing process. And she felt like it would be great if there was someone out there that could help them get the necessary items and services that they needed to make their licensing process smoother and faster. And as a licensing worker, I totally agreed, because I remember how slow the process was for some of those families that couldn't afford the CPR class or couldn't afford the physical or getting their dog's rabies vaccines updated. And those would stall the process, and then things would expire, and then you'd have to start over again. So we try to get our families licensed in a timely manner.
Just briefly, how is that experience of all of a sudden finding yourself with another person, another, a child in your home? Did you say that was formal or informal?
It was informal.
Did it stay informal?
No,
it
the
became
state
formal?
wasn't involved. And he was just with us during high school. And after he graduated, he went into the military. So
Okay.
the state wasn't involved with his placement at all. So it's considered informal.
Would you say that that's a little easier because you kind of know that it's going to, once he goes to high school and it's a short-term kind of quote-unquote, does that help a little bit, or is it still kind of challenging?
Well, there's always challenges regardless of the age of the child. I mean, having a teenager come into your home is going to be challenging.
Right.
I had 5 children of my own at the time living at home. So it was.
Did they get along?
They did, and it was actually a beautiful experience. I think our children were blessed by Joseph's presence in our home. I think we all learned a lot from each other, and it was a time of real enlightenment, I think, for all of us.
How many years again?
He was with us for 4 years.
4 years. Thank you. We'll come back. We'll come back to you. And now, Oralia, it says former kinship care, so that means, are you done?
Well, let's say I hope so. Absolutely. So I'm a former kinship caregiver, David, and I wanted just to mention something that you said the last time I was here, and you said that this is a work of love. I remember that. I resonated on that, and I thought about the 13 years that I raised my grandson. And so this was a formal placement. My grandson, I was newly divorced, living a single life, and I got the call from CPS at the time. Now it's DCS, Department of Child Safety.
Right.
I got the call that my grandson was being abused, neglected emotionally and physically. And so I, like Victoria mentioned earlier, I got a phone call. I could either take him or he was going into foster care.
That must be a very difficult decision, right? Because you may find yourself in you did find yourself, in the middle of a divorce, tough situation, but you surely did not want your kid to go to the state, basically, right?
Absolutely not. And the state ended up getting involved anyway, so it was a formal placement. There was a dependency that was filed. And even so, David, my grandson came to me with the clothes on his back. I had no backpack. I had none of his schoolwork. I didn't have his inhaler, his medical card, his schoolwork, nothing. And so it was a bit hard. And so
How old was he?
He was 6.
6. Wow.
Right, and he's 21 now.
Life throws curveballs at us many, many times, and I think it doesn't fail that once we go through the experience, we're glad we did, but that's on the other side of the experience, not at the beginning. Was that something that you would relate to, that at the beginning it was very, very difficult, but now that you've gone through it, you're glad you did?
Absolutely. Many challenges, many struggles. My grandson had special needs, navigating so many different systems, and yet coming out on the other side, what a joy. What a joy, what a privilege, what an honor to raise such an amazing young man.
Right. This experience of informal and formal, let's get into it, if you don't mind, all of us. I'll just premise by saying that when my parents came to the United States, I literally I stayed in my country. I was happened to be born in Mexico. At first, my grandmother took care of me, then my sister, and then I basically stayed with my brother by ourselves. I was 10, 12 years old. So this informal caregiving or kinship care is pretty common, would you say? But then, and if you have numbers, but then comes the formal. What is the difference? If you have the numbers, go ahead, Aurelia. Give them to us. The numbers.
So the last time that we were here, Lori Devine so eloquently came up with some numbers from the 2016 census. So I'm assuming the numbers are higher, hopefully, because, well, it depends how you look at it. Hopefully hopefully the department is still looking for family to place children with, because we know that children do better when they're with family.
Right.
So the data that I had from Lori Devine was 80% of these caregivers are informal, meaning that the child comes to them, say, for example, if my daughter were to I'm making this up, but rehabbing or going into the military or going to school, and she informally placed my grandson with me, that would be an example of informal.
Is there still some documentation that has to take place, or is just an agreement, a verbal agreement?
It depends.
It depends.
So sometimes grandparents are doing it without anything in place.
Mm.
A lot of times they're doing it with a power of attorney,
Okay.
which is not a legal document.
And we will get into those details, because I believe there's, especially with Hispanic families, it is very common for someone just to step in and take care of the family. But then when they go to school and they have to make certain decisions, there's nothing in place, and that gets kind of tricky. So we'll address that. So again, Jenny, if you don't mind, help us understand a little bit more about the formal, because I think we're using these two terms that are children who are placed in somebody's care, and by the way, do you agree that kin comes from kindred? Mm-hmm. Kindred, yes. And kindred basically means a relative, right? A family member, a relative. So can you help us understand the difference between informal kinship care and formal?
Well, when a child is in a formal placement, they're a ward of the state, and they're just happen to be placed with a family member, but they're still in the custody of DCS, and DCS allows a family member to take care of them. An informal placement, the state isn't involved at all. The child is still legally, it belongs to his parents, and a relative is just helping to raise the child. Mm-hmm. So that's the main difference between formal and informal.
Is it a long process, tedious process, difficult process to move from an informal care to a formal?
Well, you wouldn't necessarily move from an informal to a formal. The only way you can be formal is if there are accusations that the state is going to investigate on the biological family, the family that the child was living with. Mm-hmm. If a child is placed with relatives who are taking great care of that child and they're in a safe and loving environment, the state would have no reason to investigate or to make that placement formal, mm-hmm. because the child's already in safe hands.
Right.
So it would just stay in an informal placement until either it can move back with the parents or they age out and go off on their own and do wonderful things.
In your experience, Victoria, was that a formal or informal with the children that you ended up taking care of? If you don't mind speaking to them.
Well, in the beginning, because the grandchildren were born with drug exposure and a lot of medical issues related to that from intrauteral that mom was going through, the state was involved at birth because the child was born going through withdrawals and things like that. So the state immediately took over. She was born in October, and the state didn't get involved until after she was able to leave the hospital. Because in the beginning there was so much wrong with her, my son was told that there was nothing they could do for her and that she would die. But she lived, and after that got put in foster care. At that point, the state had taken over
So are you saying that the state can take over a child even from birth? Did I
Yes.
hear right?
Yes.
Amazing.
If the child is born and is drug exposed, in this case, the bio mom did drugs on the way to the hospital to deliver her. And so she was born with multiple problems.
We have a couple minutes. Were you going to say something, Aurelia? Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to add that if there's a safety issue that gets reported, then yes, absolutely.
So safety is of utmost importance to the
Yes.
state. That's like that rule. If there is a safety issue, they'll get involved immediately. Can you relate to us, the three of you? We have a couple minutes before we go on the next break. What are some of the reasons why a child ends up in foster care, kinship care?
There are a lot of different reasons. Most of the time it's due to drugs, alcohol, mental health. Sometimes it's just bad parenting skills. But the number one concern is who's watching out for the child. And that's when the state gets involved.
So you mentioned drugs. In your case, was that or something different?
It was abuse,
Abuse.
neglect,
Physical abuse, neglect,
emotional.
emotional. Okay. So in your case, how was
My
it?
case, it was completely different. My sister was raising her children in a very loving environment, but it was in Africa, and there was no schooling there available for her son. So he moved to the United States to live with us during his high school years to get his education. And so there wasn't the trauma that you have from kids that have been in abuse and neglect. There was still a cultural adjustment for him to get used to what life was like here, but there wasn't the trauma, intervention that is often necessary to deal with kids who come out of those situations of abuse and neglect.
Go ahead.
The last time I was here, I also mentioned maybe some other circumstances. It's not always abuse and neglect, although that is the department's number one safety concern. Sometimes, military families, I think I mentioned that
Right.
last time, but parents getting deployed. It could be the immigration issue that we have, that children are coming unaccompanied.
Okay.
It could also be, a parent gets ill and passes away. Or, so there are other, it's not always abuse and neglect, but that can be the reason.
I'm going to ask you when we come back from the break about this immigration, families that because of immigration issues end up basically leaving their kids. Stay with us. This is AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. The subject today is kinship, caregivers, and caretakers. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. I think it's been a couple of shows that I didn't say this, but I have to say it. It feels so good to address important issues and provide information, and I am so glad that we're having these shows. I told Oralia that we needed to do at least one show a year, if not two, on kinship care, because this is a very, very important issue. You're talking about kids who, through no fault of their own, end up in a situation that it's not healthy for a child growing up, you know. We talked about at the end of the last segment about immigration or immigrant families. There is a scenario, Aurelia, that I believe we can address. So there are parents who are undocumented but whose children were born here and they're still young. Is that happening? I mean, are you aware if that's happening a lot, where there's deportations and then these children basically are in need of kinship care?
So in my last position at the Child Crisis Center, it's now Child Crisis Arizona, I would get a lot of calls where parents were deported. They were undocumented and deported, and so those children that were born here needed family located. If the department was unable to locate family, hopefully they were able to find them a foster placement.
Okay, so this is the scenario of immigrant parents who get deported and then they have children. And then Jenny, I thought off the air you heard or you're aware that even with this caravans of folks coming to our country to seek asylum, there is the separation of families. I think there's no secret about that. And that even with those kids that have been separated, there is something about an involvement with the government. Can you relate to us about that?
Well, I just became aware of a program for undocumented minors. It's the Undocumented Minors Program through Catholic Charities. And they will actually identify children that are being detained at the border, that are minors, that need a place to live, that have no identified kinship here in the country. And they will place them with actual foster families that are willing to take in the children and be with them during the process of trying to work through the paperwork and the applications to become legal residents here.
So I understand that some folks are having to wait in Mexico, but then others actually were they were allowed to come in the country, and if they had a relative, and they can stay with that relative until their application for asylum is addressed. So now this is another scenario where there are folks, children literally, who have no relatives in this country and then ended up in a center. And they, so the Department of, what is it called? The Department of Children's Safety? Child Safety? Child Safety is the one that is taking action to see if they place them with families. Is that what I heard?
Catholic Charities.
Oh, Catholic Charities.
Is the organization that's overseeing the placement of these children in foster homes here in Arizona.
Got it. Let me ask another question. So what are the different statuses, if I may use statuses, that a child can be placed? When a child doesn't have a home, can they be adopted? Is there I don't know if I'm framing the question right, the guardianships and all that. Can you kind of relate the different, could we say statuses or?
Sure, or maybe outcomes.
So here's a child or two or three that don't have a home. What are the scenarios? What can happen with the children? What are the options? Maybe that's a better word, the options.
Okay. So I'm going to again use the term formal. So if the child is a ward of the state, as Jenny mentioned, and so there's a dependency filed, the Department of Child Safety is the legal guardian. The very first plan should be reunification, and so they hope to reunify that child with their birth parents. After a certain time, if that can't happen, and hopefully they've placed that child with a family member or with a loving foster home family, there are options of guardianship or adoption.
Guardianship and adoption. Can you briefly mention the difference?
Sure. So with guardianship, the parental rights are not terminated. and with adoption, they are.
They are. So they become, quote unquote, the new parents, so to speak, with adoption.
That's correct. The birth certificate changes. And everything.
Wow. That
They are the new
formal. Yeah. And if it's non-formal, then they're staying. Well, since we're in the non-formal, let's also talk about the non-formal. So what documentation, and I'm sure that a lot of people are listening to this show, and they probably have this scenario. And they okay, so that child couldn't remain with the parents. I'm taking care of them. But then there are issues at school and this and that. So what is some of the things that make it doable for that parent to still take care of the child in terms of decision making, legal stuff, et cetera? What are the legal processes, if you will, that should be or could be in place?
Sure. So I'll talk about a couple.
Mhm.
There is a document. It's not a legal document. It's called a power of attorney,
Mhm.
and it's good for 6 months, but it can be revoked at any time. And so basically, it's with parent consent. The parent would sign the power of attorney saying that the caregiver, whether it's a grandparent or another relative, has the right to enroll in school,
Mhm.
activities, make decisions, medical, take the child to the doctor. That's one way.
So the doctor will acknowledge, the school will acknowledge, and then that parent will be able to make decisions for the child.
It's a notarized document.
Okay.
So the parent would
And
sign that in front of a notary, but it's not a legal court document.
Right. After 6 months, they have to redo it.
They either have to redo it or it can be revoked at any time.
Who would revoke it?
The parent.
The parent.
The parent is ready to take that child again, then it would be revoked.
So that would be like the simplest way. And
Correct.
so what is another
Another
scenario?
way for an informal caregiver would be guardianship, a Title 14. And that's done through the juvenile court system.
Mhm.
The Department of Child Safety is not involved. The caregiver would go to the juvenile courthouse to file for guardianship at Title 14, and that requires a parental consent.
Still, the parent has to acknowledge and accept
And
that.
that can also be terminated. The parent would have to go back and terminate the guardianship when they're ready to parent.
So the new guardian, it's guardian, but it's not the parent. It's still just taking care of them more on a temporary basis, we could say, and then it can go further than that to more
Permanent, like adoption.
like adoption.
They
If
could.
the court will sometimes sever the parent's rights, so the child is then free to be adopted. If the court steps in and says the parents have not met the criteria that were put out for them in order to maintain that relationship, the court will sever the parent's rights, and then the child is free to be adopted.
Got it. Let me come back to Victoria because if I remember right, it seems, if I got my facts right, especially from the last show, I believe 50% of kinship caregivers are younger than 50 and 50% are older than 50. I can imagine what that is. I'm 53 and I can just, imagine I'm planning my retirement, right? And all of a sudden I have a grandkid come my way or two. How are you? Okay, you also are a representative of the grandparents ambassadors, correct? Yes. Can you relate to us? I assume that you have a relationship with many grandparents. How is that experience? And is this very prevalent with grandparents having to, once they finish raising children, start all over again?
Yes. So that was basically our life. My husband had retired. He'll be 82 this year.
Wow.
And we still have kids in the home. But it's life changing because in my case, I had to stop working, but then the children still needed things. So it became a financial hardship where we dipped into our Social Security, our savings account. We tapped into our 401 to buy a van because we turned into a family of 9 overnight.
Can you imagine?
Yes. And so there are a lot of grandparents that I talk to that are just struggling. They're like, we're getting a small amount of money. We look through our savings. I had a grandmother that called me for assistance, and she had taken out a title loan on her car to get the things that the children needed, but the interest was 32%. She's never going to be able to pay that back. But as a grandmother, what was she going to do? She was not going to say no, so she took the children in to do what she needed to do. So as an Arizona Grandparent Ambassador, we go down to legislators and we talk to them about what's going on, the crisis with the grandparents, and so that they can make some laws to change. One of the laws was the TANF that we worked on and got passed in August of 2016, where it removed what they call the grandparent penalty.
Okay, so this TANF is a financial help.
The TANF is the temporary assistance for needy families.
Right.
So if grandma got the child and she applied for that, if mom or the bio parents had already used the allotted time, which was at time like 24 months, then grandmother could not get anything.
So it was a 24 months lifetime?
For the children.
Yeah. So once you used your 24 months, it's over.
Right. And the program was set up basically to help on the welfare situation. This was supposed to help families, give them assistance for a couple of years so they could get on their feet. But when grandmother gets the children, the time had been used, so she wasn't eligible.
So the ambassadors managed to take that the 24 months
take that
rule?
grandparent penalty off, and so grandmother can now apply to get that assistance.
I am sure you feel very proud of that.
Yes.
Isn't that amazing?
Yes,
And so the
that
grandparent
is
ambassadors,
amazing.
we look at all the things that the grandparents are struggling through, and we go down to the legislators and we tell them, this is what's happening. Well, how are you going to help support these families?
Right.
And when you take a look at about 44% of all of the children that are in care are with relatives, with kinship, if the state doesn't help them out, what are they going to do?
Wow. Do we know if divorces are a big, I guess, source, if we can call it source of these kinds of issues? We know drugs, child abuse, and then going to the military. But do we know about divorces, if that in some cases the children end up being in foster or kinship care?
I mean, it could be. It could be many things. It could be a divorce that leads to financial issues, that leads to, poverty, that leads to, mom having to go to work without childcare, and it could very well. There are so many reasons. It could even be teen pregnancy. So there are so many.
So yeah, sometimes a young lady will get pregnant and they just can take care of the child, and then the parents step in, the grandparents. We still have one more segment. We still have a few more points to cover. Stay with us. You are listening to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. The subject today, kinship, caregivers and caretakers. We'll be right back.
Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. The subject today is kinship, caregivers, and caretakers. And let me just do a little reminder. If you do Facebook, we really ask you to follow our page and share it with your friends. We are trying to really, really reach a lot of people. And with Facebook, you can reach the whole world. Internet has no limits. So please help us spread the word about these important shows, where we address important subjects. Jenny, let me come back to you. And so you have mentioned, and actually your nonprofit deals with, does it deal with licensing, or it used to? You used to work in licensing.
I used to work with the licensing agency.
Would
and
you
now,
mind touching upon that? What is this licensing concept?
Well, it's quite an ordeal that a family needs to go through. There's classes they have to take, and there's a lot of paperwork to fill out, and there's interviews that they have to go through. And sometimes kinship families can look at that process and feel overwhelmed. And so one of the reasons Boost a Foster Family came into existence was to help families feeling overwhelmed with the licensing process to realize that there is help available. We can even go into their home and help them fill out the paperwork if they need help with that. We can help them with all the classes that they need to take as far as first aid and CPR and some of the other things that are financially difficult. We can help them with a pool fence. We can help them with the safety items for their home.
So why is it necessary to be licensed? Who gets licensed?
Well, it's not necessary. You can be in an unlicensed home, but there's a lot less support for unlicensed placements for the families. The children get the same support, but the families don't get the same. So if you're a licensed foster provider, you have the support of your licensing agency, and you also get a substantial financial benefit to being licensed that isn't available for unlicensed
So
families.
does that mean a person such as myself, I can become, I can prepare my home and then myself to receive kinship or children that need care? Is that
Either
the
kinship
concept?
or, yes, your home has to be prepared. It has to pass a life safety inspection.
So the license is very much related to the home?
And the person.
And the
You have to
person.
pass a background check, and you have to take
Okay.
parenting classes, and you have to be interviewed at length, and you have to be recommended to the state for licensure by a licensing agency.
And-
So it is a lot of work, but we try to tell our families that it's worth it to have that licensing agency partner with you and journey with you through the process, because you need the support and someone in your corner.
Are there families that literally, I don't know if I want to use the word business here, but that literally open their homes to take care of children that the government assigns them? I don't know
Well,
if-
that would be community foster care, and
Community foster
those are
care.
families that are
Okay.
taking in children that they're not related to, or that they
Okay.
don't have a previous relationship
And
with.
they need to get licensed?
Yes,
Those are
absolutely.
primarily the ones that need to get licensed? Okay.
You can't take in a child that's a ward of the state unless you're related to them without a license. So a community family could not just take in a foster child out of a shelter or out of a group home and foster them without becoming
Got it.
licensed first.
Only the informal if it's a relative.
Right.
That there's more flexibility, but
Right.
they will not give you a child that you have no relationship with unless you are licensed.
Right, that's the community placement.
Got it. Now, please, anyone, help us understand this matter of benefits. So there is TANF, there is Access. So what is does a child, as soon as he or she is placed in a home, automatically get this benefit, or there's something that needs to happen before?
So all of you can help me out as well, but I just happened to pull the Department of Child Safety Policy and Procedure Manual for Kinship Care, and I don't know if you can read here some of the benefits.
Yes. TANF, foster care reimbursement, monthly personal and clothing allowance on behalf of the child, special payments that may be available to the child, and kinship stipend.
Correct. Can you think of any other benefits that are department related?
So these are the benefits, but are they available to just any child who is placed in with a family,
It has to be a formal placement.
or it has to be formal?
It's a formal kinship placement.
Ooh, so if somebody is just took a child and did a power of attorney, they are not going to be eligible for these benefits.
Right.
That is important. Can you just repeat that, because that's important? Just say it in your own words, this concept. So you have to be.
Yes, they can bring in children, but unless they're licensed, they're not eligible for the benefits that we just talked about,
Wow.
the temporary assistance for
Wow.
needed family. I think that they're able to get that with the being able to prove that the child is in the home. But the other benefits all come with you being licensed. And so it's important that you get licensed.
This is the home and the person who is taking this child in, right?
Yes.
They have to, once they are licensed, then they get then the child it's eligible for the benefits, and then they themselves, correct?
Well, the child has the benefits as soon as they become a ward of the state as far as access and medical care. It's really the benefits for the adults, the ones who are providing the care.
But if the child is not placed in a home through the state, then the benefits are not there.
Well, they can apply for TANF if they have if they can show that the child's in the home with a guardianship. They can apply for TANF. There's a criteria.
Are they going to take into consideration the income of the adults in the home?
Yes.
So they potentially will not qualify. Potentially. Wow. That's why it's so critical that if they want the benefits, they need to go through this
So
process.
when they're licensed, they can apply for the TANF, and it's child only.
Right.
It doesn't take the income of everyone.
Now, the licensing, is it a big deal for the person, the person who's taking in the children, and are there agencies that can help with this process, Jenny?
There's many agencies all across the valley.
Okay, got it.
That provide licensing services.
And you told me off the air that these agencies are contracted by the government precisely to do that, right? To license. So the government can say, all right, this person is safe, the home is safe, by all means, here's a child.
Yes.
Perfect. We just have a few more minutes, and I would like to ask you to tell us about resources. Let's picture many people perhaps in a situation of they're taking care of someone. Maybe they're struggling. Maybe they need that licensing. Maybe they need to formalize the kinship case for what organizations are out there that the folks can tap into to get more information and actually get help with the processes.
So just back in October, I started a nonprofit. My nonprofit helps kinship families that are getting placement, because what happens is they're unsure about everything that's happening. And the investigation happens and they get assigned a case manager, but that might be 3-4 weeks later. What I do is go in within the first day or two, and I talk to them about all the services. I connect them with, like, Arizona's Helping Hands to get beds, and Helen's Hope Chest to get clothing, Arizona Friends and Family of Foster Children that can help them with the other things, and agencies like Jenny's with the Booster Families when we're doing licensing. All of these agencies come together to support the family. But I get in there and I talk to them about adoption and guardianship, because power comes in knowing. That information and that knowledge gives that family power to make a decision on what's best for their family, because each one of those might not work for every family.
Right.
So I get in there and I do that with them for the first 3-4 weeks and give them all that information. And by the time the case manager gets there, they're understanding what's involved.
How can folks get a hold of either your nonprofit or the Grandparents Ambassadors? Where would you recommend as a starting point, and basically online?
Well, the Arizona Grandparent Ambassador is at azga.org, and my organization is kinshiphelp55.com.
Okay, can you repeat both again? So one is
The
AZGA for Grandparents Ambassadors.
.org.
AZGA.org. That would be the ambassadors. And then
Yes.
your own?
And then mine is kinshiphelp55.com.
That's an easy one. Kinship Help 55. What's that 55 about?
The 55 is that I go in and give them 5 services in 5 visits.
That is a very creative,
Yes.
Victoria.
And I mean,
Congratulations.
I go in, I fill out the TANF paperwork, the kinship stipend paperwork. I make the phone calls,
Yeah.
because usually the families don't have
Yeah.
the time to even make a phone call.
Right. Jenny, what would you offer to the public in either your nonprofit or even other entities that you might know of, and primarily if we can give something online, because I think people do searches online.
My favorite resource to give to people is, you mentioned Arizona Friends of Foster Care Foundation, and their website is AFFCF.org, and they have a directory on their website that is 200 pages long of resources. It's a little outdated. We're not listed on there yet. You wouldn't be listed on there yet. But the resources that they have on there are statewide, and they're everything from where you can get free diapers and where you can get help with clothes, all sorts of resources for foster families.
So there is lots of help. I think the challenge many times is that they may be scattered.
There's are you talking about the kincare.org?
Yes.
Talking about that one?
Right.
The Kinship Care Coalition?
Yeah.
It's a statewide coalition.
Okay. Now, so if they go there, Oralia, will they find most of this? Are you listed in those? I mean,
Absolutely.
so would you say that would be like a starting point that we would like to send people to?
Yes, that's definitely a starting point, and they can be directed to either one of Jenny's agency or nonprofit or Victoria's nonprofit or some of the others that were.
So what is the kinship?
azkincare.org.
azkincare.org. Okay. That would be a good one.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
and then the Arizona Family Resource is a good one too. It's interactive, and you can click on it. It has little things. If you need medical, you click on medical. If you need legal, you can click on legal, and it gives you an array of information.
Right. And Aurelia, go ahead. I think you were going to say something.
Kincare.org can also link you to that website as well.
Good. And in terms of Casey, you work for Casey. Is Casey offering services that are different or similar to this, or some programs related to kinship care?
So it's different. So Casey takes cases that are referred from the Department of Child Safety, and we take the older youth. So the case has to be referred to us. And so my job is to find family members. So some of the youth that have had 5 or more disruptions that are not with family, my job is to look for family and to hopefully reunify them with family, either legal permanency, which means to place them with family legally, or relational permanency, to keep them connected to their family.
And where are they, these youngsters, as this process is taking place? Are they already in a home?
They can be in a group home, in congregate care. They can be in residential treatment facilities. They can be in other foster placements. So they're
Perfect.
They're without family.
Aurelia, Victoria, Jenny, thank you so very much for joining us today. This is a subject that it has a start, but it never ends. I mean, we can go on and on. But I hope that you out there got some information. There are resources, and if you have any doubts, just reach out to me or to our our Facebook page at AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Have a great day. We'll come back next week with another very important subject. Take care.